While reading the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger, I came to appreciate how important it is for people to feel useful and important in order to be maybe not happy, but in order to have what's considered a fulfilling, satisfying life. People need to feel like what they do day to day matters to someone, even if it doesn't have a huge impact on the world. The feeling that what you spend your time doing is important, even on a minor scale, just to a few people perhaps, is it's very fulfilling compared to the feeling that I think a lot of people who live in modern society have, feeling like your days are filled with effort and time spent on doing something that doesn't matter at all. You might get this feeling from working in a factory where your job is to do one very small repetitive task over and over again, that you never get to produce the final product that will be used by someone for a useful purpose. You're just doing one tiny part of that product. Or even worse, if you're working in a job where the product you're producing or the service is something you disagree with morally. While thinking about this series that I'm doing on what gives life meaning, I have to think about what gives work meaning, what gives effort meaning. And I came to the conclusion that many people get their life satisfaction by dedicating their life to someone else or to a number of other people, instead of living for themselves just for the sake of their own survival and entertainment. I think a lot of people get their life satisfaction by working for others, by dedicating their whole life for the sake of other people. The most obvious example of this is how people work for their families. You could think about the stereotype of the working father who goes out and is proud of being a breadwinner for his family, and he's proud of being able to provide accommodation and food and entertainment and nice holidays for his family. Whether his job is directly fulfilling in itself or not, you can imagine the satisfaction he gets from being able to give his family the life that he wants them to have. Or you could imagine the stereotype of a mother who stays at home with her children to prepare their food, to keep them clothed and comfortable, to make them feel loved. She's proud of taking care of her home and keeping it clean and making food for her husband when he gets home. And again, even if she doesn't find the actual act of cleaning and cooking to be fun or interesting, she could at least take some pride in the work that she does because she's working for her family. And I think that's something that can't be overstated, really. When you love your spouse and your children, and maybe even your parents too, if you take care of them, or some other extended family members, then you can feel good about working for their benefit. It's not that the work becomes fun, but that the work has meaning. You feel like your life is dedicated to something that matters. You feel like you're a useful person. What I think is kind of interesting to think about is how the relationship between the parents and the children changes as the children age. It's one thing for parents to take care of their children financially when the child is under the age of, say, 20. As the son or daughter becomes an adult, it becomes somehow less satisfying to be the caregiver for that person. I find it hard to imagine that you can still feel the same satisfaction for taking care of your child when they are 30 that you felt for them when they were a teenager or a child. So there are obviously limits to this parental altruism. Later on in this series, I want to talk about how the relationships themselves intrinsically can give life meaning and make life more bearable simply through companionship and, alleviating loneliness and that sort of thing. But just for this episode, I'm just talking about the satisfaction that comes from doing things for others. In the book Tribe, the author talks a little bit about how living in a war zone or fighting in a war yourself can bring life into a kind of focus. I don't know how to put it into words exactly. It's not that it makes you happier, but that you somehow feel, like I said before, it makes you feel important and useful to be living through difficult times, should I say. He also said something interesting that I can't speak to the accuracy of, about how soldiers who are putting themselves in very dangerous situations and living in very bad conditions and working very hard, of course, they don't necessarily do those things for the sake of their country, although that's possibly why they signed up in the first place and may be one important factor. He says that they sacrifice themselves more for their unit, for their friends that they've made an incredibly close bond with during their time together, to the point where they're willing to suffer and die for each other. I find it very touching to think that two strangers can form a bond like that by, spending time together and struggling through things together and forming a bond of, as close as family, or maybe even closer than that. We just had Remembrance Sunday in the UK and in other Commonwealth countries, and I was thinking of the lines that we read during the Remembrance Day ceremony about greater love has no man than the man who lays down his life for his friend. I can't help but wonder how much of that is just propaganda to make young men willing to sign up to fight in a war or to serve in the armed forces. I wonder how much of these things we say about soldiers and heroes and sacrifice, or how much of it is a genuine sentiment that is sort of a real part of human nature. Maybe if you served in any armed forces, you can let me know in the comments what you think about that. I don't have any even remotely similar experiences that I can speak from, so I think I'll refrain from talking too long on that subject, but I thought it was interesting enough to bring up at least. When talking about how altruism improves life satisfaction, I have to wonder why it is that people don't just dedicate their whole lives to helping other people, to helping strangers through charity work, through volunteering, raising money for charities, or working directly for charities with the people who need it. Of course, our economy couldn't survive if everybody was doing that, but what I mean is that the natural conclusion for what I'm saying here, which is that altruism is important for life satisfaction. Well, for one thing, I'm not saying that altruism is the only important thing for life satisfaction. I've got a whole series on this that I'm going to address different aspects of life that I think are important in each episode. But I am kind of interested in the emotional benefits of doing charity work. To me, it seems that what I call true altruism is one aspect, one factor why people might give either their time or their money to charity. But I think a much larger factor than that is just alleviating one's own guilt. These days we're constantly hearing about privilege and how various people are born with more privilege than others, but I think even before we had this term that we were using all the time, people who are fortunate enough to be born into modern wealthy economies, and within those populations to have access to a good education and a stable family home to the point where they can earn a good wage, there's some guilt that's associated with that. Thinking about all of the people who didn't have those kind of advantages, who are suffering all the time, it's natural for one to ask themselves whether they really deserve all of the material wealth that they have in their life, and whether that wouldn't be spent better on other people. But problems arise when the charity doesn't do as much good as the people donating to that charity think it will. There's many examples of charity work that has done more harm than good to the people that it was intending to help. When you give your money to a charity, it's impossible to know for sure how that money is going to be spent. But that doesn't seem very interesting to the people who are giving their money to these organizations. They just kind of trust that it's going to the right place, and I think it's more that the people like to give to charity because they can alleviate their guilt by denying themselves that money. The most important part of the act for them is that they are denying themselves the money that they are giving. That they are giving up something is the most important part of the action. The good that the money will do on the other end is of a secondary importance. Maybe that's very cynical of me to think, but what I'm trying to say is that giving to charity somehow isn't as emotionally fulfilling as helping people directly. Helping people in your life who you love is much more immediately rewarding. And I suppose some of you might say that means it's not true altruism, since you're just helping these people so that you can feel good about it. But after saying all of that about altruism, I think it's important to pay some lip service to selfishness, to objectivism. From a utilitarian point of view, you are no more or less important than any other human being. So why should you get more satisfaction from helping your wife or your child than you get from helping yourself. It's important to remember that you are an important human being. I believe that taking care of yourself is a moral act, just as taking care of someone else is. Obviously, there is a limit to this, where it does seem to get a little bit excessive when you're buying yourself a 10th car or a massive swimming pool or whatever. Everybody has their limits to what they think is appropriate for spending on themselves. But as I said in a previous video, I think it is everybody's moral responsibility to improve on themselves, and that requires a certain amount of self-care. But it does seem to me that when a life is completely devoid of altruism, it seems to produce not very happy people. That said, I do want to emphasize how I don't believe altruism can be forced. If you threaten somebody into giving their money to another person, then that isn't altruistic on their part. Their actions are being guided not by morality, but by self-preservation. Therefore, I don't believe that taxes are altruistic, and they're not moral. From the perspective of the taxpayer, they're only serving their own self-interest by giving up a percentage of their income. That's not to say that taxes are necessarily immoral. I made a video about this, and I'm still not clear myself whether they are or not, but I just thought I'd make that point, that you can't make people happier by forcing them to be altruistic, and that it is indeed impossible to force people to be altruistic. I know this video hasn't made much of a cohesive argument or narrative, but I hope it's been an interesting series of thoughts at least, and I hope you'll join me again for my next uncohesive series of thoughts. As always, please leave your comments below, tell me what you thought of the video and what you think of my series in general. Where would you like to see this series going? Thank you very much for watching, and all the best to you.
You just think about the life you'll have together after the war, and then you do it for her. That's how you know you can win. You do it for her, that is to say, you'll do it for him.